feel like Kobe in the fourth quarter.
This is the Dane Moore NBA podcast. We are brought to you by Prize Picks, coming to you Wednesday afternoon. It is August 26th, and we're going to continue doing guest month, I guess we're calling it, with today's episode. If you're just sort of locking back in on the pod after we sort of took a little break at the beginning of the month, what we have been doing this August is sort of with Wolves news, dying off a little bit, is having some guests on who work in sports media, but do not work in the NBA media space that I work in. Nate Tice, who is an NFL analyst for Yahoo Sports, he came on last week. Nate obviously is a Tice. He has Minnesota ties from growing up here when his dad was the head coach of the Vikings. And then Matthew Caller, who is a Minnesota Vikings reporter and podcaster. He also joined last week to talk about covering the Vikings, his sort of and his pathway into sports. Though the ownership news dropped right before we recorded that episode, so there's a lot of ownership talk in that Matthew episode. But it was really cool to have Matthew on because he, like me, is doing this whole covering a Minnesota sports team independently as a full-time job. We're just joking before we got started. It used to just be me and Matthew here, but now we have a third joining our ranks, dropped down to us from the New York Times.
Yeah.
Gleeman.com, and he's killing it. My guest today is Minnesota Twins writer, reporter, podcaster, Aaron Gleeman. Thanks for coming on, man.
Thank you for having me. Before, just right off the top, I want everyone to know, what a huge fan. I know I've told you this. I tweet about it all the time. What a huge fan of this show I am. I'm excited to be on it, probably to an unhealthy degree. We'll see if this turns into that Chris Farley sketch where I'm just it was cool when you used to, but I just, I love the Brit episodes, the Jace episodes, the Kyle episodes. I love the spreadsheet episodes. And I hope everyone listening to this just realizes how lucky they are to have this show and you at the helm and with the rotating guests and how I'm such a hardcore Wolves fan and to have found this show and have you guys cover the team at the ideal level of what I view of not only on-court analysis, but all the off-court stuff, the ownership stuff, the salary cap stuff. And I just wanted to say that I listen to pretty much every episode, and I no more compliments after this, but I just wanted to say that off the top.
No, thank you. That's that you would get this, the genesis of the whole show was when I started my career when I was writing, not doing any podcasting, covering the Wolves. You go and you wait in the media room for a while, before every press conference or press event or whatever, where you can go talk to the players, the coach, and you just sort of have these sometimes 15 minutes, sometimes 30 minutes. Beginning of my career, Tibbs was the coach, so we had to wait till practice was over. Sometimes it would be really waiting in there for an hour and a half. And, I'm a naive, don't know what I'm doing sort of guy, but we would all just sort of sit in there and me, John, Britt, Jace, Chris, and we would just sort of shoot the shit about the Wolves or whatever, the game the night before. And I remember me being I think this is a podcast, you know? And it took a couple years to become a podcast, but it's
that's literally we were talking about this. So John Bonus and I, Gleeman the Geek, but we've been doing it. Last week or 2 weeks ago was our 15-year anniversary. And the way it started was we were just blogging at the time. I was Aaron's baseball blog. He was twinsgeek.com. And we would have every 6 months, there'd be a blogger get together. And there'd be eight dudes. This one we went to Park Tavern to have beers.
Sure.
And John and I and a couple other guys were arguing about Kevin Slowey, who was a mid-rotation starter for the Twins back then. And we argued over beers, increasingly drunk, whatever. And then it was fun. And then I remember we were walking to our cars and we stopped outside of one of our cars. And I remember saying to him, oh, we should have recorded this. This would have, people would have liked to listen to it. And that's literally 15 years later now. It's oh, I guess, that very small decision led to, we've done 1,400 episodes. So good and bad. Be careful the small decisions you make in parking lots after having 3 pitchers of beer with some random 40-something-year-old guy at that point. Yeah, can be very dangerous.
I do want to do like a lot of this episode on working on sports media. I put it to you in the email that we're going to try and hook them with some Wolves talk at the beginning. But I do in case people are, just Wolves fans, which is, I think, the case of, I know a lot of people listen, from different states or different countries or whatever. So they might not be a Twins fan, and they might not be familiar with you and your work. You want to give us sort of we could do like a deeper dive at the end of the episode, but just sort of what you're doing right now and how it's changed this season.
Yeah. So for the previous, 7+ years, I worked for The Athletic, which like is a subsidiary of the New York Times, covering the Twins as a sort of a beat writer. But my background is as a blogger and all that stuff. So it was more maybe half beat writer, half columnist type of thing. And then in about 3 weeks into the season, they ran with no real warning. They said, "Hey, we would like to take you off Twins." And I was like, okay. And they wanted me to like switch to a national desk and do more like quick reaction to news and all that stuff, which, whatever. And I thought about it for a while. We talked through it for like 3-4 weeks and all that to try to figure something out. And I just sort of came to the conclusion of like, I'm not just a baseball writer who happens to live in Minnesota and write about the Twins. I'm a Twins writer. I'm a Twins podcaster. I was born in Highland Park. I've lived in St. Paul or Minneapolis my entire life. I've only really wanted to cover the Twins. I used to work for NBC and I did the whole league. I was at Baseball Prospectus running that site for 3 years and did the whole league. But like what I tried to get across to them, and I think they struggled with, was I'm not just a guy who you can switch it to a different beat. And that's limiting to the extent that like, if they're not paying you to cover the Twins, I can't just go cover the Padres or whatever. Right. But it's also what I found out. And the reason I chose to leave there and they wanted me to stay was I don't need this anymore. I can do my own thing. And I am absolutely serious when I say watching what you've done or what Collar's done played a part in that, where it's like, especially from the writing standpoint, we've, monetized the podcast. We got a, Patreon and all that stuff. And that gave me some confidence to jump out on my own and take a risk. But I just kind of thought, like, I've been doing this for 20 years. There are people who will ride and die wherever I go. It's not that I'm at The Athletic. It's that Aaron Gleeman's at The Athletic. They'll subscribe. And so once I sort of, from a self-confidence standpoint, had to talk myself into that and make the leap. So now since like mid-May, I relaunched AaronGleeman.com, which is how I started this whole thing like 20 something years ago. Right. And it's like $8 a month. There's some free articles, but mostly paywalled stuff. And in terms of like the coverage, I'm still going to pretty much the same number of games. I might skip like one more weekend game a month or something like that, just because, but I've still been in the press box. Hopefully that'll continue. Access is the same. And honestly, I think it kind of rejuvenated me, motivated me even more to provide good coverage. And also there was a lot of stuff at The Athletic, which I had a great 7 years at The Athletic. I don't have anything bad to say except for how it ended. But there was a lot of stuff where they'd be like, "Hey, we need you to do this. We need you to write something about, the Milwaukee Brewers because we don't have a beat writer, or we need you to write a reaction to this trade that doesn't involve the Twins just because we need the content." And that was fine. They were paying me to do it. But this has been freeing in a sense that you can just focus entirely on Twins. And so I hope people think, who have been reading me at various places, that it's as good as or better than ever. But yeah, it's been it was risky. A lot of people that I kind of expressed doubt about jumping to my own thing told me I was being silly, that of course it would work, but that's not how my brain works. Like I had many conversations with John Bonus or my girlfriend where they were like, "It's gonna work. Like, what are you talking about?" And I could not convince myself of that until like 10 a.m. on the first day. And I just looked at the numbers that had come in like 3 hours, and I'm like, "Oh, it already worked. Like it's already fine." So
I remember the day you did it, I was in San Antonio, or you like announced it. I was in San Antonio for the Wolves Spurs series, and I was like cliche. I was literally walking down the Riverwalk, in downtown San Antonio, and I was listening to your appearance like on Barrero, and you shared like you shared that piece about some of the nerves of getting into it, but then sort of that first day, how many people like signed up. And I remember like being like, hell yeah. Like I was like pumped, you know, I was like literally next to the Riverwalk walking down as the Timberwolves season is walking down. I was like, I don't know. I will say I was like, I got to get Aaron on the pod and we got to connect. Cause I was joking with Caller, like, even though we don't work together, I do feel like a kindred, you know, connection to him and to you as well. And to the community of people who are like, yeah, we will if you build it, we will come, you know, like they've done that for me, for Matthew, and for you. And I just think it's a cool thing that you've earned, you know, and so big congratulations for that.
I had to kind of convince myself of like, this is why you did this for 20 years.
Yeah.
So that at the 21st year, you could have people that would go with you to this place. Mm-hmm. And so it is earned. That's like, but yeah, it was so rewarding just to be like, first of all, I had never quit a job before, really, like that wanted me to stay. Like I left Baseball Prospectus. I was the editor-in-chief there to take the job with The Athletic. But I think even from Baseball Prospectus' standpoint, they're like, yeah, he's going to take that job with the, you know, this was like, they were so confused. And we can get into this later in the show, obviously, of like my bosses at The Athletic were just so confused about why the number 2 Twins writer, some guy in Minnesota, didn't want to keep making money until the end of the year to do what they perceived as a different job. And I just was like trying to explain it to him. And then finally I was just like, hey, I don't want to do this anymore. Like I can do this on my own. And it wasn't even that they were skeptical. I mean, they were skeptical that I could. It's that they didn't even like consider that anybody could do that. And I get it. Yeah. And so I think with the state of like media in general, it's never been more important to like support the people you think, if you're a reader or a listener or whatever, to like support the people who you think are doing it well or putting their whole heart into it or just doing it in a way that you enjoy. And so that's why I wanted to say at the top what a fan I am of your show. But like these jobs are shrinking, and even over the last 5 or 10 years, they're shrinking. And even really great jobs like The Athletic are sometimes getting to a point, if you're not in a major media market, where it's like, well, we don't need two people covering the Twins. We'd rather put you on something that drives page views or clicks or whatever. And there were times in my life 10 years ago where I would have just been like, all right, great. I'll keep doing that. I'll keep cashing this paycheck. I'll keep getting insurance. I'll keep getting all that stuff. And that just wasn't that time. And so I think I'm fortunate in a way that like the subscription model and all that has taken off in the last few years. But yeah, it's been above and beyond, to the point that I can never just sit and appreciate anything. So now my mindset is, I should have done this 3 years ago. Like I should have, you know.
Yeah, right. Yeah. No, I mean, it's similar for me. I mean, I was really just thrust into it with COVID and got laid off from my writing job and radio job and everything. Whatever. We're gonna do a whole sports media thing here. Yeah. Let's grab our first break. We'll come back with Aaron and we'll talk a little Wolves, and then circle back and for the people who are interested about the sports media space, I hope you want to stick around and listen to a little bit of our stories there as well. So we'll be back here with Aaron in a minute. Today's show is brought to you by Falling Knife Brewing Company. And if you are going to the State Fair this weekend or over the next few weeks, you will find Falling Knife beer at the Ballpark Cafe Beer Garden. State Fair veterans know what I'm talking about. There's a bunch of funky tasting things going on in the fair, but if you're looking for something good but a little less weird, you can grab a Tom's Light Lager or a Verbal Tip Hazy IPA. You've heard me say it before. Legitimately, Verbal Tip is my favorite, probably favorite beer, period, but definitely my favorite hazy IPA. So I will be having at least one of those when I go to the fair this weekend. And then also Wolves Fest related, Falling Knife related. Keep your calendar clear for October 17th. Will be our 5th annual Wolves Fest party at Falling Knife on October 17th. I can also share that we will be releasing our partnership beer with Falling Knife at Wolves Fest. If you're unfamiliar, for the last few years, Kyle and I have been working with Falling Knife to make our own beer through them, or partnership beer with them, that is called Second Apron. So Second Apron will be back. So it releases on October 17th at Wolves Fest. So get to Wolves Fest on October 17th. Get your hands on some Second Apron. That's all at Falling Knife Brewing Company in Northeast Minneapolis. Today's show is also brought to you by Quince, Quince. And August is the perfect time, I've been telling you, to reset your wardrobe with Quince. I actually really did a purge on my closet a couple weeks back. It had really been a few years since I'd thrown out a lot of clothes or donated a lot of clothes that I no longer wear. And that's what Quince is sort of about, is having fewer pieces in your closet, but better quality pieces. Quince's clothing is made with premium materials that are built to last and designed to become the clothes you reach for every day. If you're still hanging on to some worn out basics, Quince really does make it easy for you to upgrade. Quince specializes in everyday specials that work harder, like their ultra soft cotton tees. I have those. Premium Mongolian cashmere sweaters are new as well. All their stuff is versatile, timeless, and transition seamlessly from a casual workday to a dinner out. And everything at Quince is priced 50 to 85% less than similar brands because they work directly with ethical factories and cut out the middleman. So you're paying for high quality, not brand markup. Quince has become a staple of that closet of mine that I'm continuing to clear out. Upgrade your everyday. Download the Quince app or for app exclusive offers, or go to quince.com/DaneMoore. Free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada and the UK too. That's QUINCE.com/DaneMoore. All right, we are back with Aaron Gleeman from AaronGleeman.com. I'm going to say that now.
It's easy. It's easy, at least. That's the one thing. You can't say that it's a difficult website to remember.
It is definitely not. You do have a long interest in the Timberwolves, growing up here, being a fan. You wrote some Wolves articles at some point while you were at The Athletic there. Very much somebody who I think looks at baseball in a similar way to how I look at basketball. And I think that I like followed the stuff, even if you're just tweeting about it, that you have with the Wolves. I'm like, oh, okay, Gleeman. There's a stat. But yeah, I just wanted to start by just talking to you a little bit about the Wolves this season. Obviously, a lot has happened this summer. As I said to you, I want to talk about what interests you most about this season, but maybe some other like small in the weeds things first. But let's just start with what interests you most about this upcoming Minnesota Timberwolves season.
Okay. So the one thing, and I'm curious to hear like what you think about this, is the sort of transition from being like a big bruising defensive oriented team, which to some extent, if you have Gobert in the middle, you're always going to be that, but like to a more balanced or hopefully explosive offensively team, maybe a little more pace, which has always driven me nuts. I know Ant is like maybe the biggest guilty party of slowing things down a little bit, but I'm convinced that it will be like significantly more entertaining to watch. Just the LaMelo factor is that, but also I'm not entirely sure it's going to be more effective in terms of wins and losses, especially maybe in the playoffs. I know that's very, very far away. But I'm also just so curious about what LaMelo looks like when he's forced to be locked in. And I know he did it like down the stretch last year, was pretty locked in, and the results were great with Charlotte. But I'm curious, like to the extent to which his game can sort of fit what the Wolves need versus the Wolves style might also adjust to what he does well. Even some of the kind of chaos that he brings to it, which can be positive and negative. Even stuff like, I love players who rebound and push on their own. And I feel like he can do that at a level that few guys can. And that's just going to add some pace to what they do, some easy buckets, at least regular season wise. And so I like the LaMelo trade in that I think, as much as I love Nas, I think it was from a value standpoint pretty good. It does make me a little bit nervous because it's going to be more entertaining. It's going to be more balanced stylistically maybe, but also there's definitely going to be moments I feel like where you're going to watch him and be like, you got to stop doing that. Like the logo threes and all that. But maybe he calms that down so much because he has to lock in for the whole season.
This is bad analysis, but like, I think we don't know.
Right.
Like I think it is such a seismic shift just with the changes that they've made to the roster, even if it doesn't seem like that many players. having only really 3 bigs that you played last year, getting rid of 2 of them and switching it out for a point guard who's going to play 30 some minutes of point guard tonight when you didn't have a point guard at all the previous season. Like that's just a very different team. I mean, sure, you still got Jaden and Ant and Rudy. Io's still a pretty new piece. Like I do think if your question was, what do I think about the shifting of the size, is I think it's just like kind of time to close the chapter on like what the identity of this team was. Doesn't mean they're worse, doesn't mean they're better. It's just like that team, I think starting with the Denver series, the first one that they won in 7 games, really established themselves with the size, with the physicality. That felt like in that postseason, when they surprised us a little bit, we saw them playing really dedicated defense, right? And it just felt like there was arms everywhere. It felt like there was bodies everywhere. They were so big, they were so long. And that's been the best versions of this Timberwolves team over the past, since Rudy got here, have felt like that. That's not what the best version of this next group is going to feel like. It's just, I mean, LaMelo's a really big one, and Jaden's, it's not like they're not a small team, but I don't think they're going to be they're just not going to be the team that like imposes their physical size and like sort of force in the way that a Julius Randle team would, or Karl Anthony Towns team would. Like that's just LaMelo is a lot of very good things. He is not a forceful not a forceful player. He's not, that is probably his biggest weakness is like is just like sort of the strength and balance. Like but it goes the other direction where it's just going to get them. It's just going to get them running and it's going to get them playing another style. I just think it's going to be very foreign to us. And if there's anything it's somewhat similar to, it would be like the beginning of the Finch era, like the D'Angelo Russell era, where that, before they went with the double big look. But the piece that I'm caught up on with all of this is, okay, you've got a lot smaller, faster, more athletic, but you still have Rudy Gobert, who is big and physical and long. And so I don't know, there's a way to frame it optimistically that maybe you do have enough size in Rudy and Yohan and have added more of this pace, athleticism, offense, and it all comes together. But I think that's what Finch is in the kitchen cooking up right now,
Do you think with Rudy, so it's weird. I find myself wanting to like defend him in a way as an all-around player because he just gets so much crap for his deficiencies. And I think not enough credit probably for what he does well, obviously. But at the same time, like aesthetically, his offensive limitations are like, when I watch games with my girlfriend, she's just shouting about how he looks like he has oven mitts on at all times and all that. But I also wonder, like, if they go true kind of 4 out, which they're almost going to have to for most of this, does that almost like lessen, I don't know, shield him a little bit in terms of what he does poorly offensively, because he can maybe roam a little bit. He's not that much. He doesn't hinder them as much from a spacing standpoint. Then within that, I also just wonder like how much LaMelo's willingness to lob is going to help him, because I loved Mike Conley, but he was much more traditional, like pick and roll, even early on, where I feel like LaMelo is just going to be launching lobs to him. And that is the one thing that Rudy has consistently been amazing at. And even like, I think he doesn't have good hands overall, but I don't think his hands on lobs are bad. And so I wonder, like the 4 out combined with a guy who's going to actively push pace and try to just lob above the rim to him, I wonder if that can like weaponize him in ways that are like lessening some of the weak spots offensively and more like magnifying, amplifying the handful of things he does well offensively, maybe.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Just to start with the 4 out piece of it, I think that's huge. I mean, it has not been that, and that like, that's Rudy is a non-shooting 5. Like, where can you go other than around the basket, if you're not setting screens up top? And he's played for the last 4 seasons with Julius Randle or Karl Anthony Towns, who play into his space there around the basket a lot. And everybody, Cat is an incredible shooter, but Cat shoots like 4 threes a game. Cat wasn't out on the perimeter all the time. Cat did a good job. Remember the little like Cat lobs to Rudy from the elbow? Remember? Yeah, he would kind of come. He did a good job of like finding Rudy, but it was still like inherently tight. You know, you got these 2 7-footers who are kind of both at times working within maybe 12, 15 feet of the basket. It was always tight, and it's always going to be tight if you have Rudy as your center because he's not spacing the floor to 3-point range. So I think that, and I think he's got better at sort of reading some of that stuff, and now he's not going to have that other body there. So I do think he should have more space where if he catches it, there'll be cleaner opportunities to score, whether that's a dunk or a lob. And I think the LaMelo piece is totally true. He's a very good lob passer. But like functionally, what opens that up, if you're just, you're running a side you're running some sort of pick and roll with the big and you're trying to find them on the lob, you as the handler need to be a threat to score so as to get that big that's dropping back to like leave Rudy for that, half second, half foot, whatever. So you have space to throw that lob. And that's what I was saying before with like LaMelo. And even if he just like increases strength, like functional strength, attack the basket by like 10%, like then he needs to be able to do things when the big doesn't come over. You know what I'm saying? Like when it doesn't come over and leave Rudy open for that lob. LaMelo has to be making those floaters himself, which he's good at those. He needs to kind of calibrate the range. I think we've all seen LaMelo Ball take like a 19-foot floater and you're like, that's not it. But I think there's like, if LaMelo can be good in that in-between range to score himself, I think that really messes up defenses. Because now you're not only like trying to stay home at Rudy for the lob, which he is going to catch lobs and dunk them.
Yeah.
And you got Ant off ball there to like, if they want to bring a guy, they call it a tag, like bring a guy in from the other side to like sort of chip Rudy over there. Well, then somebody's open on the other side. Ant's spotted up, Jaden spotted up in the opposite corner on the opposite or above the break on the opposite side. And LaMelo with his height is going to be able to see everything. And I think with Mike Conley, as much as he was a traditional point guard, that floater dried up, right?
Yeah.
And he really never had the ability since he came to Minnesota to get all the way to the rim and finish.
Yeah.
And he was short. So it was like defense would just be like, all right, Mike, Rudy, pick and roll, clear the way for Mike to come in here and everybody else stay home. And that kind of killed Rudy's functionality in pick and roll with this, at least with Mike, which was his best partner, and Ant wasn't that good at it. It really could open something up, but I'm not convinced it's going to just be like awesome right away. I think there's going to be a little bit of a feeling out period there for LaMelo of how to play in this whole context. But you look at the bigs he played with last year on that team. Charlotte was 5th in offense last year and like number 1 the second half of the season. They were playing discount Rudy Gobert at the 5.
Yeah, it was like Kolk and Brent. Yeah, it wasn't
Kalkbrenner and Moussa Diabate.
Yeah, it wasn't
too. Yeah, not making any money. Like, so Rudy can do all of those things that LaMelo was doing with the mediocre Charlotte bigs last year.
I also wonder, and I know like part of the reason they brought in LaMelo was to just kind of juice the offense overall, but take Ant off ball more.
Sure.
Because, he should be looking to score. It's kind of been shown that he's capable of being a passer, but he's not like a point guard, obviously. But I do wonder, it reminds me of like the Chris Paul Harden pairing in Houston, where it's like you spend all offseason and people are like, oh, this is going to free up Harden to attack more. And then it's like, well, they still kind of end up saying, okay, my turn this possession, your turn next possession. And I do think that's going to be like one of the keys is like theoretically, and I'm sure when Finch dreams about this, it's Ant on a wing. They run whatever, he gets it and just goes. And I'm sure that'll happen more often now. And he won't be doubled at the top as much and all that stuff that we saw, especially in the playoffs. But I do wonder like the extent to which Ant is going to actually be able to adjust these sort of Ant's got the ball. He's going to wait 5 seconds. He's going to dribble around. He's going to assess, and he's great at it. But no amount of LaMelo Ball juicing pace or juicing offense if the ball is going to ultimately stop with him. And I'm not even saying that's like a bad thing necessarily. Mm-hmm. I wonder, like you said, especially at the beginning of the season, how much quicker he can sort of make decisions and be in attack mode where it's just like, we're going to run this. it's either going to be for you or it's going to not work and end up being kicked to you. And then you just go downhill, which is great in theory, but that really hasn't been like stylistically what he's done most of the time. So I feel like that's going to be a big Ant adjustment, maybe, is to not be able to survey it as much, not be able to dribble into it as much and just sort of get it and go, which I think can be great. But it's also one of those things where him being more in transition can be great. It's just nothing. He just, for whatever reason, hasn't leaned into it before.
It's funny you bring up the Harden-Paul one, because I don't think Finch was on the staff when Chris Paul got there, but he was on the Houston staff when Harden was there. Yeah. However, 5 years, 6, I don't know how long Finch was there, for a while. It was during the Harden era. And and I've said this many times on the podcast before, but I think it's fitting. I remember like the first year, like 2 years, I would ask Finch about this all the time, and specifically like reference Harden, to a point where I remember at something he was like, ultimately, I think the best thing for Ant is going to be that he's off ball and he attacks shifted defenses. And like, he was like, I think, he goes, we might have to use Ant in more like a point guard sort of way, but ultimately I think his superpower is finding him against a shifted defense, and he can just cut through the defense like butter, because, and you can do that off ball. He's talking about like off ball. So I think it's interesting. I mean, I know Finch's initial aim with Anthony Edwards when he came here was 2. That's what he believed. Off ball, being able to attack a defense in that sort of way. And D'Angelo Russell was on the team at that time. And then they've kind of, they cycle him into Conley, who sort of just like peters off in his time with the Wolves, got older. And then Ant just sort of became this point guard by default, and I don't think that was ever Finch's vision for what this was. I think Finch's vision was always having him alongside a primary playmaker. Like, the question is, it's a lot of usage. That primary playmaker in LaMelo Ball is a lot of usage. I will say one thing. I've just been like watching a few Charlotte games and stuff just from the end of the season. LaMelo started a lot of possessions for Charlotte out of the corners, and somebody else brought it, So I would get us away a little bit from the like vision that every possession is going to be like LaMelo at the top, Rudy next to the basket, Ant on this wing, Jaden on that wing. Like, Ant's going to still bring it a bunch, and Ant can still bring it up the floor, get into something, and then on the second side of the action, do exactly what Finch was talking about. The defense is still shifted. Okay, got it to LaMelo, came back up here, whatever happened. Ant caught it on the opposite wing, cut through it like butter. I think that's what a 2 is in the NBA today. Somebody who still brings it a lot, but there's just another guy who brings it a little bit more often than you do. And I think that's what's going to happen here. They're just going to, the other guys aren't going to be able to bring it at all, because it's going to be those 2 guys. That's just the usage sort of equation there.
Well, and the other thing with LaMelo is like, I had Brandon Miller on my fantasy team last year, so I watched a lot of there.
There you go.
And I've just been watching YouTube highlights of LaMelo Ball for the last 2 months, basically. But like, he's a good shooter, but has no limit range-wise, obviously. And so just from that standpoint, like if you were just to view him only as like a wing shooter, he adds a dimension that they desperately have needed forever, basically. And so I almost try
like
to
Dante, man. It's like Dante.
Honestly. And I honestly in my head have been trying to like almost compartmentalize him into 2 offensive facets, where it's like, okay, true point guard, initiator, all that stuff. But then also, as you're describing, like Ant is still going to have the ball in his hands, in which case he just spaces to a corner or whatever. And you just have a guy who, I know he only shoots like 35%, but also he's launching crazy shots. Like if you just have him as a spot up corner guy, I'm sure you probably have talked about the numbers. I'm sure he's going to be 38% or something like that, whatever it is. Like if you're
44.
just 44, yeah,
okay, last year.
Okay. Yeah. It was even better point than I thought I was making. Like if you limit him or limit the numbers on him to like actual good shots, however you want to define that, especially catch and shoot, where he's not dribbling into it, like he's probably one of the 10 most dangerous shooters you could have in that role.
Right.
So it was always bringing this back to baseball, like Bill James in the 80s, he wrote about Ricky Henderson that the focus is always on how many stolen bases he have. But if he never stole a base and he was just a hitter, he would be a Hall of Fame player. Yeah. And if he was only a base stealer, he would be a Hall of Fame player. I'm not saying that about LaMelo, but I feel like if you kind of split him in half, he's extremely good for what they need, initiator and true point guard for the reasons we were just talking about. But also if he's just, like you said, like a Dante style shooter, he can be incredibly dangerous then too. And also I do like the idea of he doesn't just have to be spot up shooting. He can catch and attack, or like catch and reinitiate some action from a corner if the initial one doesn't work out. So I'm super optimistic offensively. And it's weird to not be optimistic defensively, because what have they really lost? They've lost size, which is big, but like, I didn't think Randall was a good defender other than when he could just out physical someone. And I love Nas, but I think Nas was, an average-ish inconsistent defender.
Yep.
So really any worry about that is just size based, which I think is relevant, obviously, to just overall rebounding and ability to play defense and stuff. But I don't know. And size wise, like LaMelo's huge, like you talked about for a guard. Yes. I mean, Jaden weighs nothing, but he's huge and he has long arms. And Ant is not the tallest, but he's obviously strong. Like, I feel like they might be, I don't want to say underrated, but like if you just look at like pure heights and weights, it might not tell the full story about they can at least be somewhat physical, or at least somewhat length that is going to screw up opposing offenses.
Yeah. So I put down a under the radar thing that interests me, and it was about the defense that I wanted to talk with you about here. And I think it ties in. I wonder what the floor is for this defense, like just from a ranking league wide. And I feel like when I'm just like, talking to people, it's kind of like, oh yeah, like top 5, they're gonna be really good offensively, like top 5 offense, maybe mediocre, like middle of the pack, 15th offensive or defensively, right? And I think that's like what I don't think it's crazy to say top 5 offensively. I want to kind of put that is hard to do. Like there's a lot. I don't think it's a guarantee that they're going to be a top 5 offense, but I think that's totally fine to think about that way. It feels like they're smaller. The roster doesn't make as much sense. It feels like it's lost some. I do think it's lost some defense.
Sure.
But 15th would be a big drop. Like, yeah. I was going through it today. Rudy, over the last 12 years, the teams Rudy Gobert has been on, 4 with the Wolves, 8 with Utah. 11 of those 12 team defenses have been top 10. And the only year the Rudy Gobert led defense was not top 10 was the COVID year. And
right.
Rudy, so we used to always say, Karl Anthony Towns is a walking top 10 offense. And that was like, it's kind of true sometimes. Rudy Gobert is literally a walking top 10 defense. And I think and he's a little bit older now than, some of his peak time there. But if the Wolves are 13th on defense, that would be the worst defense Rudy Gobert has ever been on. And they do have Jaden McDaniels. And they do have some like bench personnel who I think will take defense seriously. And maybe with the ball in his less offensive duties, like, can we get back to the Ant of even a couple years ago? Like, I think if you get the defender Ant was 2 years ago, that's like 3 wins compared to the defender he was last season. I think that could possibly happen. So I could do this thing with myself of talking myself into the Wolves being a top 10 defense. And I don't think that's crazy. And now if you are top 5 on offense, which again, I think is a little bit easier said than done. That's the Knicks last year. The Knicks were 4th on offense and 10th on defense. So they didn't have an elite statistical profile for an NBA champion. But we're talking about even if you're like 5th and 15th, like a top 5 and top 15, we're talking about 50-win teams. Cleveland this year was 8th on offense, 15th on defense, 52 and 30. The Knicks last year, the previous year, when they didn't win the championship, they're 5th on offense, 12th on defense. They went 51 and 31. I don't know, like with the no lottery and all that, how win totals are all going to work. I think it's all going to be a little bit more condensed this year. But if they can be top 5 offensively and top 15 defensively, history tells us you're a 50-win team. And that would mean in the Western Conference that you're at least the 3 seed this year. And I don't know, a lot to be worked through there, but I think they're going to be a top 15 defense for sure. And I think maybe top 10 because it's Rudy. I mean, today's show is brought to you by Factor. And when the fall and basketball season comes around, I start doing Factor meals because when my schedule starts getting busy, it's very nice to have a meal option that is nutritious, but also only takes 2 minutes to prepare. And at Factor, with over 175 banned ingredients, every Factor meal is designed around what supports a healthier lifestyle and nothing that doesn't. And Factor meals are ready in 2 minutes and require no prep and no cleanup. So even on the days your schedule is completely out of control, eating well is still achievable. 97% of users agree that Factor meals help them live a healthier life. So you can feel confident that you're doing something good for yourself with every meal. I, again, have been making Factor meals at home dating back to, I think it was 2021 when I first got on the subscription. And genuinely, for me, it is a life hack that I would recommend to you if you're the type of person who struggles to cook nutritiously, consistently at home. Let's eat real. Head to factormeals.com/DaneMoore50 off and use code DaneMoore50 off to get 50% off and 1 free breakfast item per box for 1 year while supplies last until October 31st, 2026. That's code DaneMoore50 off at factormeals.com. DaneMoore50 off at factormeals.com. See website for more details.
I mean, I guess I'm not so much like, I think they're just going to sort of out talent people for the regular season on a lot of levels, like kind of what you're describing, like, you know, whether that means a 3 seed, 4 seed. I do think like the goal should be home court, obviously, at this point. But I'm more like, what do they look like defensively in the playoffs? But that's impossible. It makes no sense to talk about that now because there's a almost 0% chance that they're going to look like this from a roster standpoint in the playoffs. And if they do look like this in the playoffs, where like Jaden is playing the 4, that means it went so well during the regular season that they were willing to just roll with it, in which case they're going to be a top 10 defense anyway. Now we need to see how that works in the play. Like the power forward thing has been so interesting to me because it's such clearly, it's almost like a baseball strategy of like, we'll just wait till the trade deadline. Like just wait, we'll add at the trade deadline. Where I feel like NBA teams, maybe they say that and I just don't realize it as much as baseball, but
not as much as baseball.
But I wonder, like, I think in the day-to-day grind of the regular season, you can, like I said, just out-talent people. And it doesn't matter that you're playing a 3 at the 4 for 18 minutes a game or something like that, because half the matchups aren't going to be able to punish that in any meaningful way anyway. And the ones that are, you can find edges in other spots. I'm more worried about it playoff-wise, but also I do kind of question, given their light cupboard of assets at this point, like what is the ability? Like when I find myself getting excited about Trey Lyles, then I'm thinking like, is this like, do I need to sort of bring expectations because they have no draft capital really, like, especially if they're not willing to trade the Dante salary slot, which I get that they want him long-term. You know, Green maybe can be a matching, but it's not like he has significant value or anything. Like, am I wrong to think that theoretically a team could go into the season with a 4 depth chart like they have and plan on adding meaningfully to it at the deadline, but that it's going to be pretty tricky for the Wolves to actually do it just from a capital standpoint?
Yeah. I mean, well, you just went through it. Like, what are the options?
Right.
You know, I mean, it's Green plus something, you know, and I would look at the something positive asset wise. It's not going to be Green plus Yohan, I don't think, you know, like
it almost has to be like Shannon, right? Like, I mean, what are there even?
That's the one I've fallen back to, not of anything I've heard, but just if I'm just looking at this spreadsheet right now of something immediately, like if we're talking like Josh Green, I think is eligible to be traded in like 2 or 3 weeks or something after you signed, you know, did the trade. It was a 60-day pause before he becomes trade eligible. Like, let's get through that one first. You know, let's see if they act. And again, I think that would be attaching if you want to attach a positive asset, like tell me what the positive assets to attach here that aren't like devastatingly painful. What are they other than Shannon, maybe DiVincenzo, so you can get his bird rights, or Yohan? And I think Yohan's out of that. So I just keep going back to DiVincenzo and Shannon. And we've constantly been messaged that no, like commitment to Dante, all of that sort of stuff. I've thrown around like, could you trade Josh Green for a power forward who's on a like worse contract, like has multiple years of quote unquote bad money? Like that's something I guess I could see in the next couple of weeks. But if you're talking about the trade deadline and sort of the actually waiting around, you kind of have maybe some more opportunities because maybe some, like, I don't know, maybe Shannon's been awesome, you know, and things can just move a little bit. And, you know, I'm not trying to trade a guy who just signed a big contract, but like, if I'm being honest, and we're moving through the limited options that there are here, like maybe it's an Io DeSumo trade at the trade deadline. You know, that's a 20 million, like, is there a team out there who has a $20 million ish point guard at the or power forward at the deadline who goes, what would actually fit? You know, it's like a fantasy sports trade. It's like, I got too many running backs. I don't have enough wide receivers. You have too many wide receivers. Like, is that like, could that present itself by the deadline and it's him?
At that point, then you're either sizing up lineup wise to the extent that he's fungible sort of as like a guard wing, or Shannon has maybe emerged that you can feel confident, at least for like 25 minutes a night, you're plugging him in there. Like, I agree that the Green thing's interesting because, and maybe I'm wrong, but like, he's a decent rotation guy.
Yeah, totally. He's got a bad rap in all this because we've been trying to trade him since he got here.
He's just so like not needed with this depth chart as like a, 20 minute a game, like 2-3. And so, yeah, if they could literally trade him for an exact replica in terms of like contract and ability, like, 3 inches and 30 pounds heavier,
right?
That would make a lot of sense. I just wonder, it seems like one of those where it's like, okay, find that fit.
You know, what's interesting is like, there are not many power forwards in the NBA who make like exactly $15 million, but there is one on Charlotte, Grant Williams, like who's on an expiring $15 million
at the time of that trade. The two things that surprised me is that they didn't get a big from Charlotte on some level, whether it was, I know Williams is like 6'5" or whatever, but he plays bigger. Or one of the centers that you talked about just to like fill that. I know like now they're going to go with the kid at backup center, which is great. But then also that they completely exhausted the second round pick supply. And I know that like doesn't matter in terms of the value of the actual players you're choosing there, but that's all you have to sort of grease the wheels of these weird midseason trades, because the player value gets so wonky midseason because of the cap aspect. And you see guys who have good value traded literally just for like a second round pick or two, just because the team's like, we need something. And so that was the one thing that I like that trade, big picture, but it did feel weird that they had to completely exhaust the entire cupboard of just sort of like ways to grease a small trade midseason. And it feels, because I know deep down that a late second round pick or whatever is not technically that valuable, but when that's all you have, and there are tons of trades every year in the NBA where I'm like, they just gave that dude away. Like he's just a rotation guy, but they needed a salary match and the team gave him a second round pick. And I feel like that would have been the most logical or like straightforward way to fill this for the second half of the season, fill the 4, and they just don't have the ability to do that now.
It's weird. There's this way to frame it of like the Wolves are completely all in and they have no draft assets and they've spent all the way up to the apron, which is true. Oh, that's true. They don't have picks to trade and they don't have money that they can spend outside of a minimum contract to go get a guy like Jonathan Kuminga or whatever. Like that's what they can offer. But there's the other side to this. I've just like talking to some people over, since this all in deal has happened. It's like, in a way, trading a future unprotected first round pick is kind of like a 0 interest loan. It's not like the Wolves couldn't liquidate something on their roster to go get a bunch of picks. like obviously Ant, if for what would never happen, you could get 1 million first round picks from, but you could like go down, like they could if they wanted to, and that might, that's not a clean way to do that, but like you could liquidate Rudy Gobert into positive assets. True. Certainly Jaden McDaniels, like all of that. So,
but do you think do you think Green, let's say, could bring back 2 second-round picks? No. Or is he more of a neutral or below neutral value, basically? Yeah.
I think it's the neutral, below neutral. That 50, he's making 15. It's just a weird range. Like that, those are not in high demand. They're often they're often the contracts that end up getting flipped around. You sign a 4-year contract like Josh Green did. He signed for 15 million, 4-year, 15 million a year deal, I think. And that was signed that in Dallas. And since then has been traded to Charlotte and then traded from Charlotte to Minnesota. Like they're just, unless it's somebody like Nikhil is a good example of somebody who's making about that much money, but he signed at that rate and then got way better in Atlanta last year. Okay, so sure, you could, if Atlanta wanted to trade Nikhil, obviously they could trade him for, even though he makes the same amount of money as Green, that he's just there's just more of a value there. I don't think Green is bad. I just don't think you would look at that as a positive asset value.
He's more 15. Of a 8 to 10, something like that type.
Probably.
I think like in general, we're so guilty, like in baseball, everyone obsesses about the opening day roster. And then 3 days into the season, they've made 3 roster moves. Nobody remembers the opening day roster. And I do think we fall into that in every sport where it's like, it makes people nervous. And it makes me nervous to go into the season and be like, well, who the hell's the power forward? But part of me knows you can tinker at the margins of this stuff. I just wonder, a lot of the stuff that you're describing is like messing with the foundational aspect of the roster versus like even Io is like, okay, that's a pretty big, I'm not against that as a concept versus like, oh, if we had a couple second round picks, we attach it to Green or we attach it to Shannon and we get this, where I'm willing to go into the season with uncertainty and chaos and figure it out on the fly. I think fans and even media members are like too locked into like, oh, they need to have this all in place to begin. I just wonder like, what is the actual functionality or like what level of creativity can there even be when you call up a team and they're like, yeah, we have a 4 that we don't want. Literally, what are you going to give us? And it's like, well, it can't be a pick. It can't be. Yeah. I mean, Josh Green's averaging 7 points a game. Like he looks pretty good. So yeah, that's my one worry.
The mechanisms are not limited undersells it. Like the mechanisms to address the power forward position are almost non-existent. And like, again, in the regular season context, like I do think if you're playing Brooklyn, you know what? I think you probably can start Josh Green and like he guards Julius Randle, you're on, it's not a great, you're not at an advantage matchup for you, but I don't think Julius gives him 50, it's going to be interesting on opening night. They play Miami, Bam and Giannis.
Yeah.
Who's got, like that. Those are the things I get caught on, and it bothers me about the move of it's like right now, again, as the opening day roster or whatever is as currently constructed, there's just like a lot of playoff series I think the Wolves could find themselves in where you go, well, here is a issue that they're going to have matching up here. And what we know about the playoffs is they're going to pick at that. They're going to pick at that. As they did with Julius, to be fair, like
true,
Julius got picked at it in different ways, but
no, that's what I'm more worried about is like playoffs. And I know, first of all, as a 40-year Wolves fan, it's incredible to be like, yeah, I'm worried about the playoffs in late August or whatever. I get that, but like, I'm not that worried about them getting to 48 to 55 wins or whatever. I think they will. I mean, obviously they need to be healthy because like you said, there's only like going to be 6 matchups during the regular season.
True.
Where you're like, we're just screwed here because we don't have size. But the problem is some of those teams are going to make the playoffs. And if you get hooked into that matchup, like you said, in the playoffs, they will just pound that until you adjust, and they just might not have the ability to adjust. So I am like, part of me is worried about it for the playoffs. Part of me is like intellectually trying to realize like they have time to fix it. But then the bottom line there is like, do they have the ability to get creative and kind of fix it by then?
And like, we also do this thing where, because it hasn't happened yet, that means the Wolves couldn't trade Josh Green for something. Like, maybe they could. Maybe I'm wrong about the value of Josh Green. Like, maybe they haven't even, maybe they're holding out and, and waiting. I mean, I think definitely in July, like, everything in the whole market got put on pause with the LeBron stuff. Like, moves just stopped happening across the league, not just the Timberwolves, and I think whatever, it's like in the weeds with the collective bargaining agreement, but some of this stuff that's happening in this new era with like restricted free agency and a lot of these deals. I mean, the Peyton Watson was the maybe second biggest restricted free agent this summer. That just got resolved here. I wonder if if their Kuminga chooses somewhere and almost everything is settled, does the trade market in the NBA bubble up a little bit right before training camp again? Yeah. And that's where the Wolves get in the mix. That's when they made the Cat Randall trade.
Basically, are there a handful of teams that they recognize we only have a 10% chance of landing this unrestricted free agent or even LeBron? And once that zeroes out, then they're like, okay, now let's just move on with the other business that we can do, basically. And then maybe you get something. I mean, I don't think they're completely maybe I'm optimistic about Trey Lyles. I don't know why I watched so many Sacramento Kings games over the years, but
late night.
It's my understanding that that is true. Late night, that he had a pretty good year overseas. I'm not crazy about him, but there's no reason he can't be a 18-minute a night floor spacing 4 who's at least has enough rebounding and size and stuff. I think they can patch it together, especially during the regular season. Mm-hmm. I don't know that they're going to play 2 bigs, Rudy. I don't think that makes that much sense, even if they show clips of everybody shooting 3-pointers in the gym and everything. But they can piece it together. And also, maybe Jaden doesn't like playing the 4. It's not ideal for him to play the 4, but there are definitely a lot of matchups where he's going to be very good at the 4 and is going to be able to just out-length people and take them off the dribble if they try to match up that way. There are positives to it. I think
absolutely.
I think the worry is just this feeling of an unsettled situation and the great unknown of that, versus even if they had some low end starting power forward, that wouldn't make them any better. But there'd be people like me who are just okay, at least we got that solved. We can go into the season with that.
Yeah. I think we're picking nits here, right? Of hey, I see a way for the Wolves to be a 50-win regular season team. Absolutely do. We just talked about it. As long as the defense doesn't completely fall apart and the offense is something close to what we think this fun offense is going to be. I do think they're going to eventually start racking up regular season wins. And then I think there's just, Aaron, a reality of this season where they hit the playoffs, and much like the San Antonio series or the Oklahoma City series the year before, there's just some answers that they don't have when they face that opponent. That might be the 26-27 Timberwolves. I would throw out an alternative reality that was pretty close to being a reality before the LaMelo Ball trade, was they could have just ducked the tax this year, sort of reset the roster, basically just do the Julius dump trade to Brooklyn and then keep Nas. Is that team, are you confident about that group, in the playoffs, right? That team would be worse than this LaMelo team. That team is fighting, I think, to get in the top 6 of the West. So there's an element to this of where they haven't let their foot off the gas. I just think given that they've been going and they traded 5 first-round picks for Rudy, and they've been draining the assets, this might be as fast as the car could go right now. Today's show is brought to you by Ultra Pouches. And if you ever find yourself feeling like you need an energy drink or a nicotine pouch in the morning to feel like a human, Ultra Pouches are nicotine and caffeine-free pouches designed to draw your focus without putting harmful chemicals in your body. And because they are nicotine and caffeine-free, these pouches don't come with the crash or the anxiety that nicotine and caffeine can bring on. And you're probably thinking, okay, if they don't have nicotine or caffeine in them, what exactly is in these Ultra pouches? Great question. Ultra partnered with leading neuroscientists to design these pouches. They use clinically proven nootropics and adaptogens to deliver immediate focus and smooth energy that lasts 1 to 2 hours. These are truly clean, plant-powered pouches designed to sharpen your mind and lift your energy, all without caffeine, nicotine, or the crash. Many Ultra users keep them at their office for added focus at work. They're also often used for an extra push before a workout. Ultra is the ultimate guilt-free pouch, delivering instant focus and mental clarity without nicotine or caffeine. New customers can use code DaneMoore to get 15% off at takeultra.com. That's takeultra.com for 15% off with code DaneMoore. After you purchase, they will ask you where you heard about them. Please support us and let them know our show sent you.
Yeah, and that's the price of like trying to upgrade the upside, basically, is the uncertainty that comes with it, like not having a perfectly functional roster. Okay, the other thing I wanted to definitely bring up. So I listened to your episode with Kyle where you guys were talking about the ownership stuff. Like
yes. I want to talk about ownership. Yep.
So as someone who's covered the Twins and the poll ads for this whole time, it was so fascinating to me. So on my pod with John Bonus, the Twins just were in San Diego playing the Padres.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go back like 10 years, the Padres are a similar market size to the Twins. I actually think they're like a little lower.
Yep.
They had similarly mediocre attendance, no real history of like sustained success playoff wise and all that. They were very comparable, I feel like. And then they got bought, I don't know, 10 years ago, whatever it was, by a guy named Peter Seidler, who I think paid like $500 million for him. And then he just decided, I'm just going to treat us like a big market. I'm going to double and triple the payroll. I'm going to make huge splashes year after year. I'm going to hire a GM whose whole thing is making big blockbuster moves all the time. And I'm just going to sort of act as if and see what happens. And the amazing thing that happened is they're still in the division with the Dodgers. So they haven't won that many divisions. They've been in the playoffs 4 of the last 6 years. But the biggest thing that happened was twofold. One, they have the number 2 attendance in all of baseball. They literally sell out every game in San Diego, which they did not do 10, 12, 15 years ago. And then the other thing is the guy who did that died. His name is Peter Seidler. And they just his family sold the team. And it just got approved like a week ago for $4 billion. Okay. Now, I'm sitting here covering the Twins, who had a whole year on the market. And my understanding was they were looking for somewhere in the 1.7 to 1.9 billion range. It did not get an offer that they felt was acceptable, took it off the market. And now we're where we're at with but if you would have gone back 12 years and said to somebody, the Padres are going to sell for $4 billion and they're going to be selling out 42,000 people a game. And the Twins can't even get $2 billion and they're struggling to get 20,000 per game. There's no logical reason for that in terms of market size, history, track record, whatever the case may be. And the thing we talked about on my podcast, Twins versus Padres, was the impact. We focus so much, and maybe this is covering the Twins, on the negative impact that an owner can have by their decision-making, their vibe, everything. But the positive impact, which is why I wanted to talk to you about the Wolves, like Laurie and A-Rod come in and it's like, they're much more public facing. They have a lot more charisma than Glenn Taylor, obviously. They seem like they're just sort of more into owning it, maybe from a day-to-day basis. They're willing to invest. They're spending. They hire Conley. He makes blockbuster trades. I think it's so comparable to like the Padres versus the Twins. Yeah. Of like, if you would have told someone 10 years ago, the Wolves are going to be flipped like 2 years after they got bought for 1.5 billion for 4.5 billion or whatever it was reported to be, people are like, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Mm-hmm. Like as a lifelong Twins or Wolves fan, that makes no sense. But I do think it shows the impact that 1 or 2 billionaires who just say, we're just going to do this. Like we're going to treat it as if, and the quote from Tom Pohlad, we talked to him like a month ago and he was like, he basically admitted that it took him a while because he's been at the helm now for like a year, a little less. It took him a while to realize it was a build it and they will come situation. It wasn't a, hey, if the fans support the team and the team wins, then we'll invest. That's a dead end, especially when you have the reputation that the Pohlads have and the Twins have. And to be honest, the Wolves had that reputation for decades. And so it's been fascinating to me to watch, not that Laurie and A-Rod were perfect, and who knows, this new guy, I have questions about that, but like to triple the money and get to the point where two guys are on a podcast in August talking about, well, I'm a little worried how they match up in the playoffs. Like that is just mind blowing as a Wolves fan. And so I'm curious, like, the extent to which you think that is truly just a couple of owners coming in and being like, we're going to do this. Now, I know they started to have success on the court before they came in, but
yeah, it's always it's hard to give a hard and fast answer to that, because I'm sure there's other external factors in the Padres 8X situation that you talked about there. I mean, I just know in basketball, right? Like, I mean, Laurie and A-Rod could have messed everything up since they came and bought it at 1.5 valuation, and it would still be worth more. It would have sold for more than 1.5 right now. Like, these assets of these franchises are just escalating because they're part of these leagues that are increasing their revenue.
Except the Twins, apparently. Yeah. Like, I mean, they've escalated, obviously, but like, yeah.
And, obviously it happens right when, I to correct you, but more to just to correct, I've seen this in so many places that they bought the Wolves at a 1.5 valuation 2 years ago. No, they
completed it
into
2 years
this
ago. Right.
It was 2011. So it was 5 years ago when Mark Laurie bought in at a 1.5 valuation. Like, that's where the valuation point started. And then they had this, like, whatever schedule to increase their percentage of ownerships over time. And that valuation just held at 1.5. The reason Glenn Taylor and Laurie and A-Rod went to arbitration in 2023, and before this was all finalized, is because Glenn Taylor was saying it's not worth 1.5 billion anymore. Right. And he was right, but they had agreed to it in 2021 at that. And that's why Glenn disappeared, and they took it, and Glenn tried to fight to get another $1 billion or whatever out of it. So, like, I say that to mean those are other factors that, like, cloud all of this. But to the owners, to Laurie and A-Rod just coming in and spending, similar to Seidler in San Diego, like, they have paid the luxury tax the last 4 seasons, huge amounts of it relative to the rest of the league of what the other teams are paying there. And if you look, I should look back. I mean, they might have paid the luxury tax 2 or 3 times in the 15 years prior to that. And again, some things change. More teams are paying the luxury tax now, but Laurie and A-Rod definitely invested in the beginning right away in getting Conley, and then invested in the luxury tax once they traded for Gobert, and they've done nothing yet to scale back any spend as it pertains to the roster. So yes, like, that's part of the factor of why they sold for $4.5 billion, because for 4 or 5 years, they've been operating as an extremely expensive team, have had success, I'm sure San Diego was operating at a loss there for a while, and I know the Wolves have been too, but it's not really a loss. Yeah, when your valuation is going up by billions of dollars.
Talking to, like, Twins officials over the years, and they'll be like, well, we lost $60 million that year. And it's like, first of all, I don't really believe that, because the books are never open, obviously. But even if I take that at face value, this thing is appreciating 10% year over year with no effort whatsoever. And I know people go, well, if they would have put, the same money, whatever, 40 million they bought it for in the 80s, if you just put that in the S&P 500 for 40 years, you get the, well, yeah, we know that now. Like, the thing about baseball is, like, it's just builds. It never goes down, at least not yet in 50 years or whatever. And so that's the part, like you're saying, is to even take a loss, which I always question anyway, but even if you are taking what is for billionaires a pretty minimal rounding error type of loss, at the end of it, 10 years later, or in this case, 4 years later or whatever, you're getting all that back and then some, because this is just such a finite asset. And there's more mega billionaires than ever. And so there are more guys for whom it doesn't matter if it's 2 billion or 5 billion. Right. They just want the toy, or they just want the tax shield, or they just want whatever they're going to use it for.
Or they want to make money.
Right.
I mean, what's happening now is they're not toys anymore. These are, a lot of these private equity companies are coming in and buying percentages of this. Like, private equity companies not buying 6% of whatever team to use it as a toy. They're using that to make money, like, in the NBA, at least, these have switched from toys, and that was always the label. Oh, it's a toy that you pay the operating losses, and your team loses $26 million a year, whatever. Like, and that was like the tax of your toy. But that's because the valuations weren't going up like this. So it is a different thing, but I do think you're right. And I think this is kind of true about sort of startup anything, is like putting the money in at the beginning, taking the losses with the belief that something will come. And I mean, that's Laurie's background, right? Like that, I think he was cool to get in on all of this for exactly that reason, that it was going to develop into an asset that was going to appreciate and was going to enjoy it along the way. And then, like, my read on it is not that like this was an intentional Mark was planning on flipping this thing. Like, I don't think in 2021 Mark was like, 5 years from now I'm going to try and flip this for $3 billion more. I think once the Glenn Taylor stuff hit, man, and he's in the press, and it's kind of like bad press, and I mean, there's a lot. Like, you Google Mark Laurie, there's a lot of stuff now. Like, oh, he has no money, whatever. Like, he really didn't. I would go so far as say he really like hated that, and
the whole thing wasn't as enjoyable as he thought it would be.
It was until the arbitration, until like. I mean, their view of it was like, 2021, we're purchasing more and more over the course of time. And by 2024, we'll own the team. Well, it was all moving that way until Glenn said no. And then it became a whole legal thing, all of that. And I haven't talked to Mark about this, but I'm just saying from my access to him or seeing him, like Mark was at everything until the lawsuit happened. And then, man, I don't want to put like words in his mouth, but I just think something shifted there. Also, his that's when he started really investing further into his baby Wonder, that company. And I don't know, like there's a lot of sinister ways to look at it, but I think if the more details you have, you'd be like, yeah, so he's more into Wonder than he is the Timberwolves, and Wonder that is about to IPO could use a cash influx of hundreds of millions of dollars. Okay, you can just go get that. Like, I don't know. Like, I'm way oversimplifying it. I know there's other stuff there, but I think that was a lot of the Mark Laurie angle of it.
Well, and the fun stuff about being an owner, which is like sitting courtside, having involvement with the fans, going to play out. At least my understanding is like he's still an owner.
Yeah.
So he can still sit with A-Rod at a game and be on TV, and if he wants to throw t-shirts to fans and like that stuff doesn't go away. It's more just like the pain in the ass stuff or the lawyery stuff that goes away. But yeah, I mean, as I like,
or the losing money stuff, like an annual cash payout sort of stuff, and again, we don't know exactly what those numbers are too. If I'm Mark Laurie and I'm just looking at my investment in the Timberwolves right now in 2026, and knowing the vision of the team is to try to remain competitive through Ant's prime. Well, the reality of if they're going to try to stay competitive through Ant's prime,
it's going to be expensive.
Is they're going to have to painfully, pay taxes and luxury taxes in that sort of way. So if you're like, hey, I was cool with doing this while it was making money, like it even with the valuation, if you're paying $100 million every year in luxury tax payments, maybe you're not even making money in the long run. If you're, what I'm saying there?
True.
I mean, you don't know exactly what they are, but I would look at it that way. I would be like, okay, well, this team to stay good is going to cost an extra $100 million of cash a year to pay the luxury tax or whatever. Like,
yeah. I mean, I guess
it's a lot of money.
I've like been hopeful that because of the Padres situation, and I'm sure Pohlad sees that number of 3.9 whatever billion, and he's like, oh, wow. But I'm hopeful that he sort of takes the right lessons from that. I'm skeptical, but having also a similar example, like in your backyard across the street, should make it like you can't avoid looking at that and seeing those numbers. And also, I think, Derek Fulvey, who's left the organization, but he was the front office boss, he would always talk about like him and Conley are friends. And I think even on an ownership level, these guys talk a little bit. And you would hope that Pohlad is reaching out, or front office person is reaching out and being like, how did you do this? Like, how did it happen? And you hope that he hears, well, we invested. Like, we tried to treat this as a big deal instead of just trying to scrape by money. Now, it is a poll that still, and I'm skeptical. Anybody listening to this as a Twins fan is too. But yeah, I saw the Padres.
But it's a worthwhile theory to pursue if you were the Twins.
Yes.
Right?
And now that there's actual, it's not purely theoretical. And the thing about baseball is there's so few examples of a non-Yankee, non-Dodger, non-premium market just even finding out if it's doable. And so that's why the Padres thing stuck out, because it was like, this dude just said, well, fuck it, we'll do it. Like, let's just try it. And he proved it. And I'm just skeptical that the other owners will be like, well, we could do that, or we could just continue to have a, 28th ranked payroll or whatever, and just kind of make our annual profit. But anyway, I'm hoping there are lessons learned from the Padres and the Timberwolves, because
I mean, I learned about that. I didn't know that. That's a great example. Like that.
Yeah.
That is the baseball example of this. I guess I don't know enough about how apples and oranges MLB valuations are to NBA valuations, because it feels like, I mean, just living in the NBA space, like those are just,
they've exploded. But I think especially right now, because there's a looming lockout at the end of the season for baseball, there's a sense of like uncertainty with the next CBA. Are you going to put in place limitations for the big spending teams? If you're the Twins, if they're optimistic that like there's going to be more local revenue sharing and all that stuff, then by doing nothing, you could come out the other end with a new CBA, and your product that you're trying to sell for billions could just be a lot more appealing to a super rich guy. Cause it's like, okay, yes, I'm buying Minnesota, I'm buying the Twins, but if it's more of an NBA, NFL style sharing of all local television revenue, which is one of the big points that they're arguing over, then it's like, by doing nothing, the valuation of these lower end franchises gets propped up because they're getting a bigger slice of a huge pie, versus now teams in baseball are just on their own. The Dodgers make like $300 million a year in local TV. The Twins make like $30 million a year. Right. But if that changes, then the Twins could just go back on the market and get more, not because they invested more or won more or really did anything more. It's just a much easier, smoother landscape to make money for a, lower to mid tier payroll market, whatever, however you want to look at it.
Yeah, no, it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting. It's interesting how much the collective bargaining agreements do tie in to all the money, because that's what it is, which ties to the valuations and stuff. And what's been going on in the NBA is the NBA, the owners in the collective bargaining agreement have been dominating the players in like I don't know what the hell happened before the last one. It seems like the players were all like, what? Like, what does this mean for, like, it's like it did. And the owners were like, we know exactly what this means. We just capped the high end of our spending, and now we have an excuse to not pay the luxury. I mean, not even an excuse, like a logical reason to not, like, the sports that were going on the ownership side and the legal side of that negotiation versus the players side. The owners were thinking, unsurprisingly, what more funded were thought of this way smarter in a way that has made them even like position.
Listening to your show, you talk about like salary cap stuff, and like, yes, they're being aggressive, but then you reach a level where it's like, it doesn't even make sense, even from a team building standpoint, to be aggressive, because now all of a sudden your pick is frozen 6 years from now. You can't add guys, you can't do all this. So yeah, they've created a situation.
The Knicks are like, James Dolan right now, after winning a championship in New York with the Knicks, has like a strong argument for not paying above the second apron this year, and has said as much. I'm not going to do that. Like that, you can't do that. Nobody is going to do it. The Wolves did that. It was like the first year though, and we didn't really understand that pick is still frozen because of that, and might end like if the Wolves don't get out of the luxury tax in 2 of the next 4 years or whatever, like that pick is going to be frozen. But the Knicks one is like the perfect example of like NBA owners are dominating this, because even with I can't imagine how much money the Knicks have just made in the last couple months. And he's like, nope, we can't.
Yeah, because it's not purely about money. It's about like avoiding the negative consequences from like a roster building option standpoint. And
it's slip that shit into that. Like,
it is crazy that like you win a championship and it's like, we have to downgrade from Mitchell Robinson to Andre Drummond for no reason. Like everyone wanted to run it back.
Yes.
And it's not like he got some crazy contract or anything. Like he got a good contract for a good role player.
Right.
And it's like, yeah, we just have to get a, poor man's version of this player type. Not so much because of the money, although I wouldn't put that past Dolan, obviously, but like, because if we didn't do this, then we have no draft capital to trade. We have no ability to be in the buyout market. We have there's all these things. And so, yeah, like you said, it's like one of these bills that gets like through Congress or whatever. And you realize like, oh, they tacked on this completely unrelated thing. And well, shit, it's too late because it got passed through. And now there's just funding for something no one wants in there. So.
That's crazy. Okay, we'll grab one more break and then we'll come back with Aaron to talk a little bit about AaronGleeman.com and what's going on there and a little bit about Aaron's story. Back with Aaron here in a minute. All right, back with Aaron Gleeman. I've really learned, Aaron, in doing these episodes with people I don't normally do episodes with. I'm like, oh man, am I gonna have enough to talk about? I'm like, I don't know anything about the Twins. What are Aaron or Matthew or Nate? And it ends up just being so long. So I appreciate you also sticking around here.
People don't know we did like 45 minutes before you hit record, to the point that at one point I'm like, this would have been a good podcast.
I know. I literally should have snuck that in there, hit record.
There's your for like special YouTube subscribers only, like the Patreon version of that. Yeah, you got two yappers together. We can always come up with something to talk about.
Okay, so tell people a little bit about what your operation is today. I mean, obviously, if you haven't heard about this, and I would love it if you supported, Aaron's venture, and we could talk about that. But also just want to talk about like why you chose this. And I'll preempt that by saying, for me, when I went independent and I did not have 20 years of experience on the Wolves beat when I did it, I looked at, Patreon, I still thought I was going to be right. Like I was going to write or something, but every option for me at that time in my career, I viewed the paywall element of something that was going to cap like my exposure. And I just felt like I hadn't really grown enough yet to put that type of cap on it. So all of my stuff is open source. It's all ad revenue funded rather than, a subscription-based thing. So I'm making me, Aaron, and Caller all sound like we're doing the exact same thing. And that's not true, because we're all, navigating the landscape a little bit differently. But I do think some people are interested in this stuff. What has this process sort of looked like for you over the last 6 months or whatever?
I mean, what you said is definitely true, because you are capping it. And we did that with the podcast in 2019. We were doing for like a decade, we were doing one episode a week, just distributed normally, Apple, Spotify. I don't even think Spotify was around when we first started. And it was just ad supported, all that. And then the Twins were really good in 2019, and people were saying, why don't you guys do 2 episodes a week? Mm-hmm. And we didn't have the ability at that point to fill the ad spots fully for a second batch of, another 5 ads or whatever it was. Mm-hmm. So then John Bonus, I'll give him credit, because I was not into it. He was like, there's this thing called Patreon, which I'd never heard of at the time. And he's like, we go there, we do kind of special episodes. We were planning to do like maybe 1 every 2 weeks as news happened or whatever. Now we do 2 a week. We do like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, basically now. Mm-hmm. And I said, I'll do it like if we can get 200 people. And like we had like 600 immediately. And I'm like, okay, I guess shoot, now we got to do this. And so that experience, yes, our what we call the Free Friday show gets like double or more the listenership of the Patreon show. But also the Patreon show gets plenty of people. And if you're trying to make this your living, and like you said, you've done like I've done this for 20 plus years. I've done this for NBC, where it was just wide open for anyone. I've done it for Baseball Prospectus, where it was like sort of a niche audience of subscribers. I've done it for The Athletic, which was also largely subscriber based. Like once you reach a point where, like from an ego standpoint, I'm fine with whatever audience I have, and I want to do this more to make this my job, to make it sustainable. And part of me thought it might be fun to just write for people who are specifically not only seeking you out, but paying a small amount per month to do it. And I can tell you, like, the comment section of AaronGleeman.com is just a beautiful place, because there's very few people who just stumble across an article and go, this guy's a moron. Now it's, if you say I'm a moron, which sometimes I am, you're still paying $8 a month for it. So it's like a self-selecting group a little bit. And so, yeah, like it was a concern. And I did look into some things of like, could this be more an ad supported thing? I just think it's tough to scale it up, as you know, obviously.
Yeah.
But the Patreon thing really kind of convinced me of, even compared to like 5 years ago, people are just so much more comfortable paying a nominal subscription price to not only get access to something, but like to support an individual or a group that they like. And when we first started Patreon in 2019, a big part of the process was like kind of teaching people what it was. And now I relaunch AaronGleeman.com and I'm like, it's $8 a month, it's $70 a year, whatever. And you don't have to explain anything, because for the last 5 years, people have sort of gradually gotten used to that. So the audience is smaller, but I feel like I make up for that, because I can do it for a living. This can be my whole thing. I can do a whole focus on this, but also there's something rewarding, especially after 20 years of it, of being like, I'm going to write precisely what I want to write. There's nobody telling me you can't write this, you can't write that, or please write about this. And you're almost writing it, not directly to one person, obviously, but I do try to keep in mind, like, we have X thousand people reading this. It doesn't have to grab new eyes. It doesn't have to be the number one thing on Google search. If the people who are paying me are happy with this and feel like they're getting value out of it, 20 years in, that to me almost felt like more rewarding than, oh, could I get triple this audience or whatever.
So you said 2002 was what the first writing on the internet.
So
that
was after my freshman year at the University of Minnesota.
Okay.
I was in the journalism school. I had already applied twice to the Minnesota Daily. I had been rejected. I would go on to be rejected 9 times from the Minnesota Daily by like 3 or 4 different sports editors. Wow. I even at various points had like professors setting up meetings with like the managing editor, still couldn't get on. It's possible I was just the worst interview in the world at that point, whatever. And so, but at that point I'd been rejected twice and I was home from school for the summer. And I was just like, I got to just write, even if it's for 10 people, like I have to just get the reps in. Because I knew I wanted to, I've known I wanted to do that since I was like 12. It's the only thing I've really ever thought. Once it became clear that a 6'1" Jewish kid wasn't going to play in the NBA or the WNBA at that point either. Not to go Inez Freedom on the bit. I didn't mean to do that. Then I was like, well, maybe I'll write about this stuff. And so not being able to latch on at the Daily right away. I've told the story a lot, but like, I basically got home from the summer and I was like, I got to just do this on my own. Like, I got to just write. Like, I have to just get the practice, even if it's, shooting in an empty gym. I have to get the shots up basically. And it wasn't a huge audience right away, but I did it every day. And then there was a guy named Greg Rosenthal who now works for NFL.com. And he's become a pretty big deal. He was working at Roto World at the time, and they were putting together their print fantasy guide for fantasy baseball that year. And they were way behind schedule. And he emailed me one day and he had read like 2 random things I had written for some reason. He was like, do you think you could write player profiles on 50 players? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. He's like, do you think you could do it? This is 03, maybe 04.
Like right away. Wow.
Yeah. Okay. I was still in college at the time. And so I did it and he gave me even more to do and he must've been happy with it. And I enjoyed doing it. And at the end of that, he said, do you want to just work for Roto World? And I'm like, well, I'm 2 years into college. And so what I started doing was like midnight shifts, early morning shifts. And I used to go into my journalism school classes in Murphy Hall. And I would just silently sit in the back. And at the end of the semester, I had a teacher named Chris Eisen, who's like a Pulitzer Prize winning. He was at the Strib for a long time. Great dude. And he came up to me and he said, your work in the class has been really good, but I'm worried like that you have like a drug problem or an alcohol problem or something. And I'd love to help you with that because I think you have a lot of promise. And I'm like, what? And I realized I would just come over there and sit in the back having no sleep. I did like a 10-hour Roto World news shift, like player news blurbs with it. If people read that, they know it's like endless basically.
Right.
And so at that point, then I started doing more for them. I was doing football for them. I was doing baseball for them. At one point they were like, choose between baseball and football. And that was kind of like the discussion we just had, because I remember thinking, well, there's a much larger audience in fantasy football. Yeah. I could do that, but also I'm a football fan, but only to an extent. So I chose baseball. There were times when I was like, that was a mistake to do that. But then a couple years in, they offered me like a full-time job at Roto World. And I still remember I have an aunt who's like a lifelong academic, and she teaches at UW Milwaukee.
Okay.
And I approached her and I was like, look, we got to talk my mom into letting me drop out of school to take a full-time job doing what I'm going to school to eventually do. And I'm coming to you because I think she's also like written books and stuff. So she knows like the writing lifestyle. And I'm coming to you because my mom knows you're an academic. And if you can sort of reason with her on this. So I remember we took her to like some, I don't know, suburb restaurant. She was like, oh, this is lovely. You know, my son and my sister. And like 10 minutes
Just
in, we're
wait.
like, 10 minutes in, we're like, record scratch. Okay. So I'm dropping out. She's going to tell you why. And at the end of this, and my mom was like, yeah, fine, whatever. And so from there, I started doing full-time at Roto World. NBC bought Roto World like a few years in at that point. So then I switched from writing fantasy for Roto World to just writing baseball for NBC. And I did that for like a decade. Got laid off from there, went to Baseball Prospectus where I was editor-in-chief for like 3 years, and then jumped from there to The Athletic to cover the Twins. And the thing was, like, covering the Twins was my dream job. And I always say, like, until 2019, when The Athletic hired me, nobody had ever, like, I had a pretty good following. We had the podcast going. Nobody had ever said, hey, what if we just pay you to cover the Twins locally? Any outlet had ever said that to me, basically. And so it was a dream job to do that with The Athletic. But then what I ultimately found, and why I chose to leave them in April, May, was a dream job isn't just locked in forever as a dream job. And if the circumstances change, if the people you're working with change, if the sort of conceit of the whole site changes, which I think it has, then it's not your dream job anymore. And you can't just cling to that notion of, how can I leave this? It was my dream job. Well, if I'm not covering the Twins, it's not my dream job anymore. And so I had to kind of battle with that a little bit, but then ultimately decided, like, do I want to just be a baseball writer, or do I want to be someone who writes and talks about the Twins? And that's ultimately what I'm passionate about. And I also just think that's what I'm better at. And so I decided to do the jump, and then it's been great. Like, I mean, it's so rewarding just to see the numbers and the people subscribing, but it's also just rewarding to hear from people who are like, oh, I remember reading you 20 years ago, and now I'm at the new place. And it really does make you feel good, especially writing can be such like a solitary thing where you just see comments. You're not seeing people. I'm not someone who does live events that much or anything. And so it was rewarding to see a lot of these names popping up and be like, oh yeah, I recognize that guy from 10 years ago or whatever. But it's gone. Like, I had this like goal when I did it for like a couple years down the road. I was like, if I can get this number of paid subscribers, I can just do this forever. And we hit that day one, and we're now at like 3x that. And it's certainly not from any help from the Twins, because they're not a good team. It's not like there's been some great playoff run or something like that.
It's been better than expected.
Yes, it's been at least somewhat entertaining.
I say that like I know what I'm talking about.
No, you're right. You're right. They're going to beat the Vegas over under for sure.
Yes.
But so yeah, that's kind of how I ended up with this. And I think because of my background of starting as a blogger at a time when people hated bloggers, and also dropping out of school, and like I grew up, single mom, and me, like we didn't have a lot of money. I've always been obsessed with like having a job and knowing I have a paycheck. And so that was like the last thing I had to conquer here, was to just sort of free fall into this thing a little bit, and just maybe it doesn't work. And it did work, which I'm thankful for. But like, that was the last barrier to do this. And like, Bonus talked me into it. My girlfriend talked me into it. A few other people talked me into it, of like, I don't think you realize there's a high floor here, if we're using the same terminology we use for like a roster or something. And so once I got talked into that, I did it, and they were right. And the ceiling ended up being pretty high too, at least so far. And I mean, I've never been happier. I hope people enjoy it. And now it's just basically 3 times a week I talk to Bonus on the podcast about the Twins. 2-3 times a week I write something for the Twins, or about the Twins, for that audience. I'm still covering them the same way. It's freed me up to do some other stuff. I wrote a Sunday column in the Pioneer Press.
I saw that,
which was great. John Shipley, who's their sports editor, is the one who hooked me into that. And his big selling point was, because I was like going back and forth. I was like, I don't know if I want to commit to having it be a regular thing. And you know what he said to me? He goes, I know you like Jace. Jace thinks it's a good idea. And I was like, you know what? If Jace thinks it's a good idea, let's do it.
Yeah.
I'm a Jace stan. So that was a good selling point on me.
No, I am too. The comment section on YouTube, not always a Jace stan, because he says it how it is, you know?
Yes.
Like, and Britt, I feel like Britt says it how it is too. But Britt gets, I think, a little bit more age-related grace there.
Right.
Like, you know, Jace
well, and he approaches it, which is why I love Britt. Like, I've known him for a long, long time. He approaches it in a much different. He's much more observational. He's much more eye test. He's much more all that stuff, and also just endless stories, institutional knowledge. Like, whereas, so I feel like there's more leeway there, where it's like he might drop a stat on you, but that's not the point of this. Of talking to Britt, not that he's incapable of doing that, but the point of talking to Britt is Britt will just tell you everything he thinks at every point along the way. And like I remember 15 years ago, like having beers with him. Yeah. We had a mutual friend, David Brower, and we would go for beers and we would talk Wolves, and I would come away from it being like, I love this dude. And you throw in like the accent and the like gruff demeanor. Meanwhile, he's like the nicest guy of all time. Totally. And it's just like it's such a perfect storm. See, I lied. I said at the beginning I was going to compliment you once and not again, but now I'm talking up the podcast.
That's Britt.
Yeah, true. Okay. But he's part of your your environment you've created here.
Yeah. No, I mean, I got to do like a whole episode with him sometime just about like, I think like Aaron's weird pathway to this to like fantasy football to it is weird. Like, I promise you, Britt's, I mean, he's just way older than you and I are.
It's just going to be stories of him at some jazz club being like some guy you've never heard of. And then on the side, he was writing Wolves. And I knew Britt was a real one, by the way, when he was teamed up with Krasinski at The Athletic. And he was sort of the columnist to Krasinski's beat at the beginning. And he was great. Yeah. And then they went away for COVID and they cut all freelance. And then when it was over, they tried to bring Britt back, and you know Britt was like, nah, fuck that. No, I'm not coming back. I don't need you anymore. You did me dirty. Like, I'll just do it on my own. And there was part of me that was like, maybe I can take a slightly toned down version of that approach with The Athletic.
I've said this story before about Britt, but I think it's good, and it's along those same lines. Britt was working at Sports Illustrated. It's probably like in the aughts, you know. Okay. He was working at Sports Illustrated full time, covering the NBA at large, and you know, that's kind of, you know, like that's when the blogosphere was sort of coming up, and it became more of like a 24/7, 12 months a year cycle where anybody covering it, any website covering any sports was like, we're not going to stop for this off season, right. You know? And so Sports Illustrated got bought by somebody or better funded or whatever. And they took everybody from 8-month-a-year jobs in the NBA to 12-month, you know, full time. And everybody got like a lot more money. And it was like, for everybody there, it was like, woo. But for Britt, he was like, nah, like in the summertime,
right.
I don't write about basketball. I write about like music and politics and like, and they were all like, what are you talking about? And he was like the main guy. Like he was back then, like if you talked about like the NBA power ranks, it was like Mark Stein did power ranks for ESPN. Britt did them for Sports Illustrated. It was Schumann. There was just like a small contingent. Yeah. There's a small group of people who did it. And Britt was that. And they were like, what do you mean? And Britt's obviously like a very good writer. Like he was like, no, I don't want to do it. I'm not. Yeah. And they like try to come back and convince him. And Britt ultimately leaves. And I think then that's maybe when he went to MinPost or somewhere. Yeah. He left and went to MinPost, and it created a full-time job at Sports Illustrated. And the person they hired for their first full-time job in NBA media for the Britt position was Zach Lowe.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that crazy?
That's a hell of a butterfly effect. Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Right. Yeah.
I didn't even realize that. That's interesting.
I mean, Zach would have made, I'm obviously Zach's stud. He would have made his way there, but like he was writing at like Zach had been writing at Celtics blog, which is like Canis Hoopus, like the equivalent of Canis Hoopus here. And I think he'd started doing like freelance stuff or whatever, but Britt refusing to take like a raise to like kind of work a little bit more created like, Zach Lowe's pathway. I know it's crazy.
Britt just has a very interesting lens through which he views life, I would say, where it's like, oh, I view it as a feature, not a bug that I only work 8 months a year. Like, and it's very, everyone else would be like, yeah, I'd love the bigger paycheck. I'd love the whatever. He's like, no, those 4 months are probably my favorite 4 months because I'm just doing what I actually want to do, which is.
And now I get that because, and I mean, yours is even crazier with baseball, but it's like you do. I mean, we're so lucky to be doing that. I hate to frame anything as like a complaint, but like, when it is every day you're going to games or practices and stuff, like there just is I mean, I've dealt with things close to like real burnout.
There's just a saturation of like, even at the end of a 9-game homestand or something where I've gone to every game, you get to like game 8 or 9 and you're like, do I like baseball at this point? Like, what is but then you like, if you skip one game,
you're fine.
You're back at it the next day and you're like, okay, this is the greatest job in the world. But I mean, any job becomes a job. That's, I mean, part of why I left The Athletic was kind of that reasoning a little bit, but it's, and that's why with the podcast or with my writing, there is something that I think sort of evades that burnout, at least temporarily, when you're the one deciding everything. And there's another element where it's like, it is more on your plate, where you're having to make decisions and you're having to book guests and you're having to do all that sort of thing. But then ultimately it's like, I'm going to write this because I either want to write it or I genuinely think the audience wants it, or you're going to have a guest on because you actually want to talk to him, as opposed to some corporate entity being like, we need you to have a Denver Nuggets guy on to discuss this or whatever. It's like, if I want to have a Denver, because I've listened to those too, but it's like, it's just a completely different thing. Like in my situation where it was like, hey, we don't have a beat writer for this team and they signed a free agent. We need you to write about it. Like, is that the end of the world? No, but there's something like motivating or like refreshing to just be like, I'll write about it if I feel like writing about it. And if I don't, I'm going to trust that I know what I'm doing and that the audience kind of knows that I know what I'm doing. And I don't know, it's been good. And like I said, it's opened up some other stuff, like more freelance stuff with, obviously when you're under contract with the New York Times or whatever, you can't do that. The real downside is, I go to some happy hour with my girlfriend and meet her friends, and they're like, the husband is like, what do you do? And I'm like, oh, I write about the Twins. Oh yeah. Where do you write about the Twins? And it's like, damn.
Yeah.
It sounded a lot better when I was like,
dude, it's the
New
same
York
for
Times.
me. I like, oh, what's the name of your podcast? I'm like, Dane Moore NBA podcast.
Where it's like, oh, what website? AaronGleeman.com. And they're like, oh, and that's you? And it's like, that's me. You want to be like, no, I'm doing okay. I swear. Like, that's really the only downside that I've found so far.
It's like the professor who thought you were an alcoholic.
Yes.
Are you okay, Aaron Gleeman?
It was by the way, he was being so nice. He was like going to get me help. Meanwhile, I was like, no, I was writing backup running back blurbs until 3 a.m. and then your class was at 7:30. And
I'm also putting together that like I definitely, that means read Aaron Gleeman Roto World blurbs at some time, unknowing that it was you. I mean, that's when I would have started playing like fantasy football. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there was a great crew. I mean, on the basketball side, it was Steve Alexander, Dr. A, who people probably know. On the baseball side, it was like Matthew Poliot, and then I became the baseball editor for like a few years. On the football side, Greg Rosenthal, who's now at NFL, and Evan Silva, who's launched his own fantasy thing, is great. Like there were some really like great writers there in that era, and the guy who ran it was this guy Rick Cordella, who now runs Olympics for NBC. Like he's advanced up the NBC.
I mean, I guess it's 20 years,
Yes.
Like,
I remember when NBC fired me after like 11 years, I emailed the guy, Rick Cordella, who he basically hired me. And I was like, hey, I just want to thank you again for all this. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking maybe he'll do something to stop this. And his reply was, Like, that's great to hear. I really haven't been involved for like 6 years. I'm like literally, hiring Mike Tirico and deciding what studio we're broadcasting the Olympics out of. But yeah, that was
it's elevated to another level.
yes.
Yeah.
Some of us like to stay at our station and really hunker down in there and just turn down opportunities for growth to just focus on the slightly below 500 baseball team that we really want to cover.
Same.
Yeah.
Okay. Let people know like what is all included if they, if somebody was wowed by Aaron Gleeman here, never heard of him before. And it's like, I want to, whether it's listening to the pod or subscribing to AaronGleeman.com, what does that all look like?
So we do Monday and Wednesday episodes on Patreon. You can get the Friday free show, always free, ad supported. If you like the show, we do Monday and Wednesday commercial free. We have a lot more guests on those. We kind of mimic what you do, have all the beat writers cycle through. We have some executives and we had Derek Shelton on and that sort of thing. That's patreon.com/Gleeman. If you sign up for the year, I think last year it ended up being like 75 cents an episode or something like that. And then on the writing side, AaronGleeman.com, it's $8 a month. I think for the year, it's like a 20% discount and ends up being like a buck a week. And so far I've been averaging like 2 to 3 articles. I've gotten even further away from like news stuff and really focused on like column style, analysis style stuff, which I'm more interested in reading. I know when I read, and I just think I'm better at that. So sign up for both, sign up for either. Unfortunately, you don't have like a dual because Patreon is such its own thing, but AaronGleeman.com for writing, patreon.com/Gleeman for the podcast. That's basically it. I mean, it's like I said, I'm a huge fan of the show. I'm glad to be on. It was fun talking not only on the show with you about this stuff, but pre-show about this stuff. And I do think like you're right that it is a very small fraternity of people who have made this decision to just sort of bet on themselves. And it is comforting to at least have a couple other examples locally that you can point to. And I also think it shows like we picked a good time to try to do this just in the grand scheme of media. On one hand, the industry sucks as a whole, but on the other hand, because the industry sucks as a whole, I feel like it's led to kind of innovation that's forced. Like people have to get subscription sites. They have to branch out on their own. And I know like I couldn't do this 5 years ago, just like we couldn't have launched the podcast 10 years ago. And so I'm fortunate to do that. And also to just be on and honestly, selfishly, I'm just happy that there's a Wolves pod that I pray that somebody views our pod the same way from a Twins perspective of like talking about the team in like a meaningful way, talking about salary cap stuff, payroll stuff, talking about roster stuff, not just and breaking down games and plays and stuff too, but not just talking about it in the same way that like the average radio station did 15 years ago or whatever. Cause I mean, that's why I started blogging was I just felt like there wasn't analysis in the newspapers. And that's honestly why we started podcasting like 15 years ago. We felt like, God love KFAN. I've been on there a million times, but they're not breaking down the Twins in any sort of meaningful way. And so there was like a market inefficiency to take there. And now I think technology is sort of caught up in a way where you can just do it on your own. So yeah, I don't know. I'm thankful for that.
Well, I will say there are definitely, this, there are very many people who feel that way about your show. I know about 15 of them texted me last night once you did the little eye emoji.
People were hyped.
People
I was hyped
about that.
And they were hyped too. Because whenever I tweet an episode that you guys do that I thought was particularly good, people are like, "Oh, when are you guys going to collab?" And I'm like, I don't know, maybe. So, this will not be your only time here. I'm glad it was. Wow, second date. You're offering a second date here. I'll have to think about it. I'll think about it. I want to play hard to get a little bit.
Okay, fair. No, this is really awesome. I'm a little bit younger than you, and I've like. There's a time well before I was even the idea of working in sports media had crossed my mind that I just like heard you on KFAN or whatever. And I think that version of myself would be like, it's pretty cool that however many years later, I guess not only were you willing to come on here, but be a listener to it. So it's I think you get like, I'm sure you've had some of that with people that, you've interacted with, that you read, or what I know you have in the industry, but it means a lot to me too. And yeah, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, you're doing good shit, man. I hope you're proud of it. I hope you
Thank
know
you.
that there are people like me who are devoted to it and love it, and think not only just from an audience and a job standpoint that you're crushing it, but just like there are people who look forward to the show in a really true way, and that like the group of guests you've had is so perfect for what the show is. And I hope, and I'm maybe speaking to myself in some way this too. Like I hope deep down you're like proud of what you've built here. Not that this is the end or anything, like you're going to keep building, but just know there are dudes out there who are like, man, I can't wait to listen to Dane and Britt and Kyle or Jace or whoever break this shit down, because it is the good stuff, and it is unique even in this era. The approach you take to it, and I'm such a big fan, and thank you for inviting me on. I will come on anytime, whether you like it or not. I'm going to try to come back on.
Thank you. No, that's very kind, Aaron. Again, listeners, AaronGleeman.com, Gleeman and the Geek, and I mean, I try to promote everybody, and with Chris and Jace's writing and Britt and everybody who comes on, but if there's ever if I could ever nudge people a little bit more, not just for Gleeman, but for Matthew as well, as I just know the importance of that, and just didn't. And again, and it doesn't even need to be the subscription thing. Listen to the podcast, just check out the free one, and
honestly, as
all that
seen,
stuff matters. Yeah.
As simple as sharing it on social, when you don't have the corporate entity, and I've learned this leaving the New York Times, obviously, there's no one big 300,000 account tweeting this stuff out. It's Dane pulling a clip of him and Jace talking, putting it on Twitter, and then guys like me like, "Ooh, this was good." And if you think it was good, hit that retweet, or honestly, tell one friend like, "Hey, have you listened to this?" It might sound really simplistic and sort of like, "Aw shucks," like, "Oh, this is really cute." But that's how this stuff grows. It's word of mouth. And when you're on your own, especially after you've been under the corporate umbrella, you really start to see how meaningful and the impact that can make. So anyway.
Absolutely. And and it's just flattering, it's flattering to be consumed, by so many people. Like once upon a time, I was just a guy who watched Wolves games, and you were just a guy who watched Twins games. It really is that simple. I didn't play in the NBA, and Aaron didn't play in the NBA or WNBA or the MLB.
There's your clip, by the way. That'll go huge on right-wing TikTok or whatever it is.
Right-wing TikTok. Okay, this is awesome. Okay, everybody do all of Aaron's stuff. Follow him on Twitter if you're not following him there. We are going to do at least one more of those these whatever media episodes. From the Evil Athletic, we're going to have Alec Lewis come join us on Friday.
He's one of the good ones. I'll let it. One of the nicest guys I've ever met. You're good.
Well, that'll come out some point this weekend. But I think this 2-hour podcast will satiate all of you until then. Until Friday with Alec. He's Aaron. I'm Dane. Peace out.
How I'm feeling, man, I hope it never stop, Greening hard so you can find me in the crowd, Don't let standards ever bring you down,